I need to get back on my game as far as some of the videos I wanted. I had some technical issues with the follow-up where I wanted to have a panel, but I want to put this in now because I'm seeing such anti-black stuff coming from Pan-Africans that mimic Garvey. Hey, here we go. Yes, 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 yes. It's going to be some iconoclastic stuff today. But as you're going to see, though, this is going to be really fair. 6 years ago, I probably would have said I was a Garveyite. If you go back 6 months ago, I probably would have said I was a Pan-Africanist. If you see that something is broken and you feel like you can better fix it from the outside or address it from the outside, or you don't want any part of the sinking ship, the cheap sinking ship, then you move accordingly. Part of it is I had to agree with what Yvette Carnell said about Pan-Africanism. I'm for the sentiment, but it has no political efficacy. And because of its basis, it wasn't ever going to have any political efficacy in the USA. I'm going to get into some of that. So there were some things, and I know, like, this is, to say that Pan-Africooning, and really I wanted to speak more on the anti-black racism, and I will. I wanted to put that in the thumbnail title, in the clickbait, because it's not just cooning for cooning's sake. There is some anti-black racism within this. And I'm going to go into my logic behind it, starting with my issues with Garvey, but I'm going to show a few Pan-Africanists that share the issues I have with Garvey, and they've picked up his legacy, and instead of picking up the good and educating people about what was wrong, they've done the exact opposite. I mean, even worse than that, because they don't even educate people about what was right, for the most part. So I'm going to start with Garvey. And I've forgiven Garvey because a lot of this stuff I already knew. Some of this stuff, and I will give credit where it's due, I did learn from the Freedmen. I'll credit their channel, even though I have my issues with them and disagreements. You know, if I get anything from someone, I'm going to source that person and credit them for teaching me something that I didn't know. But a lot of this stuff I already knew about Garvey, and I forgave, or I didn't know the depths of it, and I didn't connect the dots as well as I could have, or moved accordingly if I did. I want to also say, this is not a shot on Africa. This is not a shot on Africa at all. Like, when it comes to African culture, I'm still like, if there's a way to be a sentiment Pan-Africanist and a cultural Pan-Africanist, that's pretty much me. Like, I'm Adolf's spirit. I don't know of anything on my lineage that isn't foundational black or foundational white. Because I've done, if you're familiar with my channel, I've done so many DNA tests. I have knowledge of self in extreme. And I've done genealogy. I can trace my history back 300 years in this country. Maybe not quite that long, but almost close to it. I can go back beyond that with DNA, right? So this isn't about Africa. I like I think the dashiki is the best shirt anyone has ever made, period. It'll keep you somewhat warm until it gets really cold. And even then you can wear long sleeves underneath it and you're good until it gets really, really cold. It is a great shirt when it's hot. It'll keep you cool. It fits me well. I look good in them. I like African food. You know, I crack up when I hear a lot of African Americans who don't like African food. My mom did not like Ethiopian food. I remember when we went out to eat Ethiopian food, she said that injera was dirty bread. I like injera. I like Ethiopian food. I even like the steak tartare. I've had that. I've had raw Ethiopian beef and enjoyed it. If I don't eat it on the spot, I will microwave that. You know, like I'm not going to eat anything that's sat in the fridge that's raw, but I've eaten it raw on the spot twice and enjoyed it. I've had West African food from Togo. I've had West African food from Ghana. We've had those restaurants. We used to have a restaurant where I'm at from the Ivory Coast. And I've had that too. Classic jollof rice. I think it's maybe a tad overrated by the way some people say it, but I can grub on jollof rice all day, every day. This is not about African culture, and it's not about African people. Not at all. This really isn't even about immigrants. Matter of fact, let me get started with Garvey, because one of my issues with Garvey is I don't even think he really liked African people. Because one other thing that I take from Africa more than anything, and if you've listened to my channel, you might have encountered it, is I'm a non-denominational traditional African religion person. The binding of Africa, where the culture is shared, because you have a whole bunch of different ethnic groups, different subcultures, but the main area before the Abrahamic religions that linked Africa to itself was the style of its animism. Because other people have animism. Some people, especially people near Africa, have animism that's similar to Africa. This is something that Marcus Garvey wanted to destroy. So I want to get into that first, because I don't think Marcus Garvey was good for the African American. And I don't think, had he succeeded, he would have been good for the African. Now, but before I go into that, because that's coming soon, there are a couple things like that bothered me about Garvey from the get. I don't like how he would often address black people as you instead of us. Listen to his speeches. I don't like how he got his tone and his style of speech from listening to a white dude. I mean, if you know, game, recognize game, blah, 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 blah. I have no problem borrowing whatever from anybody. If someone has something good and you can borrow it and use it for yourself, that's great. But it starts a pattern where I don't think he didn't bring him. It was, let me find out what works, not to reason with people, not to strategize, but to just be that convincing preacher. Just convince. Not the reasoning of my word, but let me take this tone. As many may know, he met with the KKK in 1922. met with a Klan leader in 22. 1925, he sends this letter to a white supremacist, Ernest Cox, where, and I'm pulled up these sources. I'm going to pull up these sources. You can Google them and see. And if you read like this letter, he is just kind of like oogling over Ernest Cox's book, the book White America. And this kind of goes into one of the flaws with Garvey and a lot of people, is he was obsessed with race. Instead of stepping back and seeing through race as what it is, race is opinion and force to divide resources. Like, nobody's born with a label. Because once you kind of step back and realize this is a contraption and you look at why they're creating this contraption, then if you're reading a white man's book about white America, maybe you're not calling it a wonderful reading from the white man's point of view. Maybe you're realizing that this is propaganda. And in his letter, he says, the fact is that the modern Negro is a lazy, good-for-nothing slumberer. And it's my conviction arrives at close, careful study and experience. If something is not done for him, he will die as other unfit races have. Now, you might think he's just talking about African Americans, but he's not. He's not. He had issues with Africans that might be deeper than the whole issue with African Americans. Because if you look at, and understand, this was 1925. Lazy, good-for-nothing slumbers. This is 4 years after Black Wall Street was destroyed. This was 2 years after Rosewood was destroyed. But let's look at like how he felt about Africans. Because this is something that I had read a long time ago, and I let him slide for it. I let him slide, but and this isn't something secret. Look at the general objectives, and this is from 1914. The Universal Negro Improvement and Conservation Association had general objectives. They aren't listed right here, but the fifth one, if you look at it, was to assist in civilizing the backwards tribes of Africa. Okay. That's questionable. How are you going to assist assist who? Colonialists? Because he really starts to sound like a colonialist when you look further at one of the goals is to promote a consensuous Christian worship among the native tribes of Africa. Now, from my point of view, the most powerful thing Africa has going for it, and the most powerful thing if Pan-Africanism ever had any political efficacy, it would be to utilize African religions. And not even saying, and I've said this many times, not even saying you got to get people to change religions. If they're already deep into the Abrahamic religion, that's fine. You're not going to be able to get people to change most of the time. But you can say, hey, borrow this. Borrow this. Look at how African nations, look at how their civilizations ran. And I'd argue that their religion was the gears of their civilization, whether it be ancient Africa in the time of Yam and Kush, and Punt, whether you go back that far, or you look more in medieval Africa from like Ghana and Dartichit on, That, or, Kanem Bernu, and I've mentioned this a bunch of times also, is how one of the reasons why, like, West Africa produced vaccine technology is they deified smallpox. They're the smallpox god. So smallpox god, smallpox priest. And this is one of the reasons why I like a lot of Pan-Africans who go into this type of research, I'm great with, and I support. Like Asar Imhotep, because the way he studies Kemet, he shows he'll unlock certain things about Kemet through modern Africa, and in the process of doing that, you unlock modern African culture through the writings of Kemet. Thirsty, I'm about to crack open a bubbly. And in doing that, you develop an understanding for the roles of priests in society, and how a lot of times, to quote Asar Imhotep, a priest is just a nigga with a job. So if you're a nigga with a job, to address this horrible disease, you might try some things, and eventually some things that they tried worked, and they created an inoculation which became the foundation for modern vaccine technology. Naheem, he's read a bit on Hubert Harrison. And I would advise watching this video if you want. Like, I've given the sources for most of this. The other sources are in that video. Hubert Harrison is a Caribbean, one of the few, because this is like, we didn't really have many black immigrants at the time. But he was one of the few, and he broke from Garvey and called Garvey out for a lot of his BS. How he was inflating his membership. How a lot of what he wanted to do just wasn't realistic. And Harrison, at the time, he knew that the African American struggle was in America, and he didn't consider what Garvey was doing to be realistic. And he goes into much more detail because he was working with Garvey at first. And I'll give another example. This is one where a lot of people came out against him. This is, I'll read from this, because this is related to the Garvey Must Go campaign. There was multiple anti-Garvey campaigns, and if you really listen to what they were about, I'll let them speak for themselves. The Garvey Must Go campaign gained momentum after Garvey had held a secret meeting with Edward Young Clark, the leader of the KKK, in June 1922. Immediately afterwards, Randolph and Owens Messenger magazine published an article entitled "Marcus Garvey, the Black Imperial Wizard, Becomes Messenger Boy of the White Ku Klux Klan." Black leaders were further infuriated when they learned that Garvey had a speaking engagement in New Orleans, remarked that because black people had not built the railroad system, they would not insist on riding in the same cars with white patrons. So it wasn't just that he was meeting with the KKK, and I had known about that, his meeting. Man, I had called out Pan-Africanists, because a lot of Pan-Africanists will criticize Yvette Carnell for being on a board that was funded by a deceased white supremacist. And I'm like, but Garvey met with the KKK. How is that making any sense? And when you actually look at the numbers in terms of immigration makes the U.S. less black. Because most of the immigrants that are coming to this country are Asian, and it's not like I've said this before, it's not Andaman Islander black Asians. These are not Asians who consider themselves to be black. Because I've talked to Filipinos who were like, hey, you know what? We got black people in the Philippines and we got our native blacks, and they do, like in terms of appearance. And even like certain people like the Poppins who left Africa a long time ago, they're so isolated, they still got a little bit of African in them genetically. Now, like the black Andaman Islanders types and the Filipinos that the Filipino I was talking about, the black Filipinos, they don't. Like they don't. They are very much Asian genetically. But since race is opinion, if they're saying we got black people, they got black people. It's their opinion. That's how they feel. And that is good enough. But to get back on the subject, Garvey was wrong. Black people built the railroads and the White House. It's like saying that we should never have a white president because black people built the White House. It's just, and this is a type of rhetoric that I've heard back then and I'm hearing now, where because Pan-Africanism, as Yvette Carnell says, has no political efficacy, what you end up with are people who just try to insert rhetoric. And a lot of these people, and this is rightfully so, where I agree with them, they're not blue no matter hooligans. They're not, hucklebucking with the Democrats, whatever the Democrats say. So lacking critical thinking and original thought and political strategy, they go along with the numbskull shit that comes from racist Republicans. And you see that, like with Rizza Islam, he just had to call out some bigot who came out as anti-reparations, even though he was working with Rizza Islam about the vaccine and, trying to get out to people that, hey, this vaccine isn't properly vetted. Ironic that we're back on the subject of vaccines because, West African inoculations and now we got COVID and now we got a vaccine that's built off that technology. But like Rizza Islam should have known, because a lot of these people, like the people that are against vaccines, even though Trump was the one pushing it the hardest and first, a lot of these people, I'm just going to call it, you should know that they're racist. You shouldn't be surprised. like Rizza Islam. You didn't see that coming? And then Rizza Islam supposedly, and this is something that I heard from the Freedmen, is that he had a picture with Alex Jones. I'm like, hey, I don't mind you meeting with Alex Jones as long as you come away saying, hey, I called him out for all that and all that. But don't meet with him because you're finding common ground about a goddamn vaccine. No. If y'all have common ground, then you do your ground and let him do his. But that's what I mean about when you don't have political efficacy and you're left flat-footed in the reparations discussion, when you don't have any type of strategy, because going to Africa to civilize the backwards tribes and spread Christianity is not a real political strategy. So they're looking for something. Well, what do I say? What do I do? How do I talk? And they end up just falling to cooning. And this is one area where I didn't know about this. I have to give Be the Power at the time. Now their channel is the Friedman something or other. I forget what it is. But as most of y'all know, Marcus Garvey never went to Africa. And why would he? Why would he want to be around these backwards pagans? But let's look at one of the reasons, because he could have went to Liberia. There was colonialism all up and down the continent, but he could have went to Liberia. But for the fact that he was banned. So here's an article. This was, I think this was after he died. He said there was no evidence that he had ever set foot in the continent, and the Republic of Liberia was, by announcement of its government, closed to him and his followers. He blamed the British and the French government for that. Dude. How could you not go to Liberia? Never. I mean, he went to Britain. Yeah. Another thing, and I'm not even going to really speak on this because I didn't go too deep into it, but maybe if you care, like, Be the Power at the time, they were breaking down the RBG flag. Now, I've heard a lot of people like Camgiverse, who I'm going to get into, talk about how, and this fool's always beg shaming, that we're going to be begging white people to use red, white, and blue in it because Pan-Africans will use the RBG flag during Juneteenth. And I'm like, begging white people, the Juneteenth flag was already red, white, and blue. And they showed the sources too for this. So I'm going to let them tell it, but according to them and their sources, the Friedman, Garvey's RBG was influenced by red being Native Americans and green being Irish. And yeah, they ripped them for not knowing the history of the Irish, and of course they ripped them for allegedly not knowing the history of the KKK. Because it actually gets deeper. And I'll go into a little bit of why it gets deeper. I'm pretty much done with Garvey. Because we're actually here's another one. This I got from Ali. He's going to some old sources. He talks about the 2,000 Negroes that denounced Garvey, and I want to go into why. Let me read this. And you could actually, let's see. So the speaker referred to Garvey's reported visit to Atlanta and the statement credit to Garvey's secretary that the Ku Klux Klan might rehabilitate the Black Star Line by investing money in it, and said, Garvey tells you to accept the Ku Klux Klan at its face value. He tells you not to oppose the Klan, which has lynched you and robbed you again and again. That Garvey's a leader who shows himself a cowardly, whining adventurer, an individual of doubtful honesty and demagogic charlatan. It's A. Philip Randolph's publication. And yeah, you go into like W.E.B. Du Bois, A. Philip Randolph, there was a streak of hucklebuck and talentism and all that. But a lot of these people had moved away from their original flaws. Matter of fact, Du Bois, he died in Ghana because he had moved away all the way. He had moved all the way towards Garvey. But I think they had moved to the right direction because instead of opposing Callie House, A. Philip Randolph and W.E.B. Du Bois became reparationists. They just became that sort of Claude Anderson style reparationist where they make a speech or two, but they don't really back a movement. They don't click a movement. They don't get a movement going. And then the one person who was really going to do that, MLK, he was like, yo, I've desegregated everything but the money. He gets assassinated. Naheem said it often. Logic said it on that video. A lot of what Garvey did amounted to mission drift. Because you got to look at it, it's just like with BLM. You got to look at what happens if they get what they want. If BLM gets what they want, what happens? We respect LGBT more. Because, I mean, if he gets what he wants, basically the KKK helps ship us out. 2, mess up Africa. Thinking that we can civilize some people that already had civilization. Thinking and to destroy the thing that they have that I think works the best and that binds them together, and that's their old religion. But like I said, there's so much good you could have took from Garvey if you wanted to, but they didn't. And that's why I got to step away. Modern Pan-Africanist. So let me shift now to talking about like my issues with the modern Pan-Africans who took the worst of Garvey. I want to start with Kamjiverse because I've debated Kamjiverse for almost a year. And to me, Kamjiverse is a good example. And they were like, well, is Kamjiverse even black? We can't see his face. You can't see my face. I think he is. Because he's actually like me in the sense where, and not like Garvey in the sense that I vibe with him when it comes to African culture. I got Bucci Bear there, as proxy for Brandon. That's Brandon. Now him and Brandon, they've butted head recently because Brandon is a stone cold anti-black racist. One example with Brandon, his Kamjiverse was challenging Thomas Sowell's nonsense and Thomas Sowell's reaction or his position that Ebonics is just bad English. In Kamjiverse, I think mostly with just primary research and common sense. He did a video challenging that. And I agreed with him completely. I think he should have added from the person, or like at least noted, maybe added examples from Ernie Davis. I think that's his name, the man who pushed it originally, I believe. Let me see, I can look that up real quick. But I didn't see like him cite, I know his first name is Ernie. I'm not thinking of the football player. But I'm thinking of somebody else. Hold up. Ernie Smith. Ernie Smith. I would have liked to see him substantiate his claims with something from Ernie Smith. But Bucci Bear, and Bucci Bear is a much better bear than Brandon is a human. He comes in waving the pom-poms for Thomas Sowell, because that's just his nature. If there's an anti-black position, that's going to be Bucci Bear's position. And I could go in like top to bottom, Kamjiverse, I can't keep saying that, but Kamjiverse has a lot of positions that I agree with. So I was always going in on him on the stuff that I disagree with, because he criticized Tariq's museum, but he's not saying nothing about that anthill colony, Akon City. He'll criticize the quote unquote hashtags, but only when it's for Americans, or when it's not wrapped in Pan-African nonsense, like in Cobra Crat, Narc and Cobra. So under that backdrop, and he's also very much anti-reparations, and you'll see, because I'm responding to him on Twitter. And he says you see France as a proxy similar to the way they view, I don't even know what country that is, in South Africa. Western consciousness is essentially pan-European. It's a shame Negroes endorse slander in the West. I don't know why he puts it like that. Slander Pan-Africanism in exchange for checks that ain't coming. Checks that ain't coming. Now, I might go back and, because I don't think there was much more than this, but his reparations ain't happening. I'm like, do you just see what happened in California? Because since California recommended an amount that California can't pay, but an amount that if California were to, with the benefit of the federal government, pay, would go far as to destroying the caste system on the West Coast. I think it would bleed into Oregon, probably bleed into Mexico. Because I got family that moved to Mexico. They're like, to hell with America. But it would bleed into Oregon. It would bleed into Washington. Because it was just that much money. But it was still an amount that California couldn't pay. Now, even with that, UCLA did a poll recently. And in their poll, most Americans weren't just in favor of reparations. And it wasn't a great majority. It was a great majority when it came to most, not Americans, but most Californians were in favor of reparations kind of overwhelmingly, but a slight majority even favored cash, even though their state can't pay for it. So I don't know how you can be that adamant that it won't happen. It ain't coming. But that's his attitude, because that's in league with this whole do for self. But when it comes to the actual politics and the rigor and the arguments and the legal maneuvering that it would take to argue it up, get it popular, pass laws, that's not doing for self. And a lot of Pan-Africans even seem to have this this belief that agency dies the moment it involves a white person agreeing with you, which is insane. Because, I mean, like, the foundation of Garvey, remember, is taking a white man's preaching style. And beyond anything, I would suggest he was constantly reaching out to white people for assistance. The Klan to assist him getting ships to ship black people away from America, which again, so I respond to him. Same with the French protests, because I agree. Because in this, in this tweet, he had a picture of a black dude burning the American flag, and I agree. They don't respect free speech, when it's coming from black people, and then same with the French protests, because what's happening in France, it's kind of died down now, but that's French. That's how French do. They don't let the government kill their people. They turn up. They've been like that. You've had the French Revolution where it's like, no, we'll kill the government. We'll get rid of this. We run the government. And the U.S. is typically like that too, in the sense that we tell the government what to do. Now, he's one of them people that will beg shame, which is nonsense. And no capitalism shame, because if it's cash, it's capitalism, which is crazy. Because they won't do that for anyone else. And then they'll turn around and say America owes Africa reparations and talk about how it destabilized Africa in the slave trade. And I'm like, considering Africans sold slaves, I'm not going to make that argument. I'll give you the chance to make that argument. And he never argues, period. Like on Twitter, I'm constantly, if you look up my account, if you look up Steve Rogers, Captain ADOS 42, I'm constantly debating white supremacists. Camg verse, you never see it. It's always foundational black Americans. And he tries to do it through Tariq, which is kind of silly, because Tariq has said over and over and over and over and over again. You can't say it anymore than he's already said it. FBA is just a slogan based on the lineage, or a lineage based on the slogan. It's FBA is Assata Shakur. It's whether you like it or not, that's what you are. Now you could argue, like with the whole standard that Darity has, that if you don't claim blackness, like Candace Owens, then you don't qualify. But that's fluid, that's moving. So, Negroes in the West slander Pan-Africanism in exchange for a check that ain't coming. And I'm like, it's because Pan-Africanism is often proxy for escapism, pandering, dogma, posturing, strategic sloth, and a way to mass corruption. And now his response is, you describe the hashtag to a T. The hashtag. Pandering to idiotic Negroes to use xenophobia, and that's another thing that came from white supremacists, specifically the left-leaning ones. And this is Kamjiverse using this. The same thing you get from Garvey. To tether white identity politics and dogma. Huh? Posturing as reparationists while promoting a welfare check that won't get... So this is just babble at this point. But I want to show you like the mindset that even intelligent Pan-Africanists have ran with. I want to show you this mindset. So let me show some more of these. So I'm saying you're projecting. Umar checks every box. And I show a video from Bitter Dose TV. In this video, it's called Why Are Y'all Listening to Umar? And he does in this video, Umar checks everything. Escapism, pandering. I mean, you got Kamjiverse who will beg shaming, but here's Umar talking about, give me your grit money. You spend all this money on grits. Like, when truth be told, we don't spend money on goddamn grits. We don't spend money. Descendants of slavery in the U.S. don't have money. The wealth isn't there. That's why your school hasn't launched. Panders, dogmatic, posturing, strategic sloth. He hits them all. His response is, Umar's actually done more for black people than the traffic lawyer and the stud who exclusively dates Becky's. And this is just lying. I mean, if we want to be truthful, somebody made a fake tweet that Yvette never made where she was talking about how she had like some picture of a white woman talking about, this is my lover, well, accept me and this is my truth. Anybody with half a mind would know it's fake, and Kamjiverse has half a mind, so he's just lying. This isn't mission drift. This is intentionally derailing a mission. And that's why I say this goes back to anti-black racism. For people who say why I say that the modern Pan-African movement has a stake in anti-black racism. This is why. Because they aren't doing this for other people. That's just not happening. And I said, you didn't watch the video because dogma prevents you from changing your mind. In the video, Umar sounds just like you. First, reparations won't happen. Then when it's moving, it will happen, but money won't solve anything. Now, I would advise watching this video from Reset Race on Umar. It's recent, easy to find. Because when Dr. Phil says the same thing, it's fuck 'em, cut the check. And that's exactly what Umar did. First, he's talking about, and this is in the past, right? This is deeper past. Reparations won't happen. Then when it's moving, I'm in favor of reparations, but if we get reparations, understand that black people will just give it back to, just sort of all that stuff based on power and economics that, from Claude Anderson, that really there's no actual source to it when you grind it out. There's no data on the dollar moving around in neighborhoods and all that. There's nothing on that. But that's where he's coming from. That's where Umar was coming from. But then when Dr. Phil said the same thing, He was like, how dare you? Oprah put you on and blah, 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 blah. Now you have a problem with it. So this is Kamji saying, you're not really an American. He can't type you are because you don't know white people. Your perspective of their politics is beyond delusional. The check ain't coming in your lifetime. It is what it is. I don't know white people. Umar is white people in this equation. He said the exact same thing Dr. Phil said. And he can't respond to that because that's exactly what you see in the video. He didn't watch the video. He responded too fast. And like I said, it's because they're dogmatic. I'm responding, being American has nothing to do at all with white people. Pan-Africans are like white people, i.e. Dr. Umar, and you constantly using the same racist talking points, beg shaming, grieve shaming. If it happens right before or after I die, that's good enough for me. The court then his response, and we've argued this back on YouTube. The courts have already decided that it'll never happen. You are free to keep dreaming though. And I'm like, the courts abided many times over, and I'm showing them the history of reparations payment. So the courts are fine with reparations. Then he says a statute of limitations is passed. And this goes back to an old case, like I think it was in the late 90s or early 2000s. Or this lady was going after companies that benefited from slavery. And the statute of limitations had passed for the companies. And that's something that has not a damn thing to do with what's going on right now, especially with what's going on in California. I've heard nobody say anything about the statute of limitations in the modern reparations movement. Because these corporations don't have the money to actually do reparations anyway. So even if that's true, so the hell what? I mean, the only entity that can do reparations correctly is the feds. If you know me, reparations correctly, because we don't have, the U.S. can never render the amount of money it would take to actually cover all the human rights violations. So it's a settlement. And it's a settlement that would end the caste system, the racial wealth gap. Now, you don't want to do it state by state, but California, and because black people are moving away from Biden, and Biden might need the black vote, well, might my ass, he needs it. He could argue it up, and with an executive order, he can't send the money to California, but what he could do is he could tell Republicans who control the budget that I need you to create a budget for California. And they have to do it. Then that would eventually either there'd be a feud and there'd be a vote and all that. But if he does an executive order to outline the budget, not necessarily sending the money, but hey, create a budget for it, that starts a debate and it might lead to a vote. And at the very least, that is one way that you would expose what Democrats to vote for and what Democrats to vote against. Because right now, we're kind of in a situation with the Democratic Party that reminds me a lot of what happened with Damian Lillard and the Trailblazers GM. Where Lillard is like, hey, we need to go into win now mode. I'm not leaving. It's not based on whether or not we win a championship. I want to see that you want to win a championship. I'm not trying to wait on all these teenagers that just got drafted. Win now mode. And they're like, no, I think we need to shut you down this year. You've coming off an injury, shut you down. Okay, we shut down. Then the next year, it's like, we're kind of far from making the playoffs, even though they were only like 4 or 5 games out. They shut them down and they go for it for 1 year. And they're saying, hey, but we're going to trade the pick and we're going to go all in. We'll pay the luxury tax. We'll do all of this. We'll win. We'll go into win now mode. And they don't go into win now mode again. And that's where the Democrats are. And Black Americans are in a position where we have to say, just like Damian Lillard, nah, I can't go with you right now. I'm getting lied to. You're just stalling. You know, you're not going, like, I know what win now, I know what you trying to push a law looks like, and this ain't it. I'm not saying you have to do it. You know, some people are, you know, just kind of as a slogan, they're like, no reparations, no vote. But the reality is, Biden could get the vote without reparations because we understand where we're at in terms of Congress. But you got to reach out to these Republicans. Because when they want to pass something, if it's gay marriage or legal weed or anything they're trying to argue up and make popular, they reach out to Republicans constantly. They shame Republicans. And if you can't shame Republicans for their racism on this, if you can't make this being the easiest argument in the history of politics, we know you're not in win now mode. We know you're stalling. And now it's like Black people have to like, hey, we have to call a bluff. And if we end up with decades of fascism, and that we have to do, you know, we don't want it. We're the most liberal voters there is. But we're not trying to have a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man caste system. We choose venom. And that's the position we're in. So I responded, there is no SOL. You're making that up. That would have disqualified reparations for Native Americans first, and it didn't. Another trait of living in a fantasy is just making it up as you go along. There is no, if there was an SOL, why is it you never called out Cobra and Narc for getting paid to pretend? Do you see where I'm coming from? Now, do you see where I'm coming from? And I could go deeper into Kamji verse. But I know since he ain't showing his face, and a lot of people, these Pan-Africans, and here's the thing. I gave one example with Ebonics. When it comes to Kemet, a lot of stuff involving Africa. Kamji verse is a real one more than Garvey. Kamji verse would never say some shit like, we need to go civilize Africa. We need to go Christianize Africa. Like, he's an anti-Black racist on some tribalist stuff because it's just African Americans. This nonsense about a goddamn statute of limitations. That's what the SOL is. There ain't no statute of limitations. And for something that's happened in my lifetime, like if you look at, like with the California task force, they're recommending stuff that happened in my lifetime, like mass incarceration and redlining. You know, I moved from California to Washington from one red line place to the next. Didn't even know that Seattle was red line. Not surprised, because when you really look at it, but that's an example of Kamji verse. Now I've talked a little bit about actually, let's go in on Bucci Bear. Brandon. Now I've always had issues with Brandon. Well, since I've known him, like I get vibes, you know, that it's more than the whole thing where you're taking Thomas Sowell's side and he's taking the attitude that it's just bad English. And he even defended Thomas Sowell and said Thomas Sowell checks these Negroes, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, so you had a little infighting between the Pan-Africans. Because Kamji verse, I know you if you're saying you're hearing some issues from Kamji verse, right? But he's actually a better person, and Bucci Bear is a better bear than Brandon. Brandon has said some stuff that makes me wish Tariq Nasheed would have given him an uppercut when he saw him. Wish he would have beat his fat ass. This fool was on he was on Dinus Demir's channel, and he was responding to ADOS. Now, I don't think anybody was actually talking about ADOS, but the response was sort of jumping out of line, and he was talking about how when immigrants come to this country, they already know that black people been enslaved and all that. You aren't special. They faced other stuff, blah, blah. Because what it is, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. ADOS's position on immigration is sort of like, if you can't beat them, join them. We know that these Democrats are going to bring in illegal aliens, except for Haitians. They'll just give them a plane ticket and a couple lashes. We know this. So they know this, ADOS knows this. So they're saying, hey, if we don't bring in these immigrants here, we have to teach them about the debt that we're owed. Now, Brandon, because he's an anti-black racist, in the spirit of Garvey, is against that too. Now, if you were to take like something closer to Marcel Dixon's, or even my stance on immigration, and my stance is, hey, if you're going to deport Haitians, let's deport all these illegal immigrants. We have a bad immigration policy. It's making us less black. If you're going to do all of that, okay. But ADOS takes a stance that is more neutral, and I would say even more realistic, because Democrats and like corporatist Republicans, they're trying to bring in illegal immigrants, right? So it's like, if you're going to bring them in, and since I've seen maybe two polls, one is a California poll, another is a Pew Research poll, where most immigrants, even though most immigrants make America less black, or not black and all that, most immigrants, from the two polls I've seen, are in favor of reparations. So it's kind of a shrewd position for ADOS. It's like, hey, okay, so they won't be called all this anti blah, blah, blah. And I've heard Brandon on Dinus Demir's channel. I like Dinus. Dinus, I watched this documentary, and like I said, this is nothing really against Africa. African culture is cool with me. I don't know if I can go with the whole bushmeat thing. I'm not trying to eat some bat, but I might eat some rat. I might. It depends on how it looks. I've seen some bushmeat that I'm not touching with a rock I throw at it, but I'm not even trying to get in sniff range of that bushmeat. But I've seen some bushmeat I might mess with. You know, we can talk about it. They cook it up, put some rat and some jollof rice. We can talk about it. So again, this is not against African culture. When it comes to African culture, I am a proud appropriator. I don't care what you say. I'm gonna wear my comfortable daishiki. I'm gonna eat my injera, and goddamn it, when I go to Africa, I might even mess with some rat. So this isn't even about that. But Brandon is one of those people that was constantly bitching about the museum that happened. But no smoke for Umar Johnson's school that ain't happening. No smoke for that anthill / termite mound colony called Akon City. Because this is tribal. And if you were to insert all of this tribalism amongst white people, or pretty much anyone else, we would say you're racist against them. You're mission drifting the hell out of them. You're bringing all this tribalism to them. And I'm not going to put Pan-Africanism on this, because I think most people would probably agree. But man, there were a lot of people agreeing with him in the comments when he said this. He said the DC Young Fly doesn't love his children because he didn't marry his kid's mom. And because he let his kid's mom get that surgery that killed her. And this is maybe this is on Pan-Africanism a little bit, because Umar Johnson has that same spirit. And I agree with Umar. Women in redlinia have the worst pick of men. Men in redlinia have the worst pick of women. When you come from a legacy of human rights violations, that's what you get. And I'm not talking about like character-wise or beauty or anything like that. I'm talking about building a power couple. But you cannot excuse bad behavior because you might have a bad group to pick from. That doesn't mean you act a fool because, ain't no husbands, ain't no good husbands, so I'm just going to pick a bad one. And how is somebody going to say that somebody you don't know does or doesn't love their kids based on whether or not they got married? If he keep having kids with this woman, whether they married or not, they're married. They were married. They were married. Maybe he doesn't have the Christian values or whatever values. It's not just Christians who get married. Maybe there's some issues that we don't know about because they have their relationship and nobody's in the room with them. We don't know. But you can't force a woman to not get a cosmetic surgery. You try to tell a woman what to do and all hell break loose. They'll be writing articles about you and talking about how we want to oppress black women. He couldn't force her not to do that. And we don't know who wanted to and who didn't want to get married. We don't know. He's young. Look, I'm the same way. I have 3 kids with a woman I never married. At one point, I wanted the marriage. She didn't. At another point, she wanted to continue the relationship. I didn't. She dumped me and wanted me back. And because we have kids together, I treat her as family, but I'm with someone else right now and not going back. And I hope she finds someone that works well for her. It happens. Never had any effect on whether or not I love my kids. But that's something that a bad person would say. And that's why I say Bucci Bear, working with the feds and all, is a much better bear than Brandon is a human being. From what I've seen, because that is an evil thing to say, especially after he just lost his kid's mom. That's dirtbaggish. And that's one of the reasons I don't want to be associated with Pan-Africanists anymore. I'm not, like I would say, okay, I'm a Pan-Africanist. No, I'm a former Pan-Africanist. I vibe with the sentiment. Long live the spirit of Gaddafi. But you see what happens when we had a tetherish coon in Obama. You see what he did to Pan-Africanism. You bring forth Sambo, it doesn't matter. Sambo will mess everything up. And it's become a movement of nonsense. Even like bright, intelligent people. I think Brandon is an idiot. Umar Johnson, he's a good student. But damn, he's an idiot in a lot of ways. And I still respect a lot of Pan-Africanists. I probably respect more than I disrespect, but this clique of this cultish group has become prominent. And it's that strategic sloth. So I'm calling it out. There's a lot of Pan-Africooning going on, and it's become tribal to the point where they aren't correcting it from the inside. Tribal and unnecessary and silly. Because people are trying to get reparations, and now that's capitalism. Then you have another clique that'll call it socialism. And they'll go around and around in circles, and it becomes the same type of mission drift you had from Garvey and others who who adopted this nonsense. Because even back when I was a Garveyite, I was seeing more of how like the Panthers began to adopt some of this. Because my dad was a Panther and he had a bunch of newsletters, and I was reading the Panthers newsletters, and they'd go around in circles arguing about capitalism and socialism and Marxism. And I'm like, this is what happens. This is what really led to me nominating Yvette Carnell to lead a reparations movement before there was an ADOS. Is I'm like, there's no political agenda. Hadn't been since MLK. You know, because people will do the lazy shaming, the greed shaming with capitalism, the bag shaming, which is really ridiculous. That's something that I've seen from Kanji verse 2. Bag shaming, $17 trillion, and you true power to brag. You got all these corrupt groups wrapped in daishiki cloth and all that, and you ain't saying nothing about them, and they're making actual money. ADOS isn't making money. Like, they aren't funded by these groups that and you, oh boy, I could do a whole video on that, like on who funds Cobra to do nothing, who funds NARC to do nothing, and some of the new groups that are popping up that already have funding from Democrats. And some of these new groups that have funding from Republicans to go against reparations. I forget the Sambo's name that was on Dr. Phil's show. Him and Coleman Cruz Hughes, they're on one of these new Republican-funded groups. Like, so we got new Sambo alliances that are paid already. And you ain't saying nothing about them. But I'm getting greed shamed. I'm getting bag shamed. And this bag shaming makes no sense because, look, ain't nobody whiter than Germany. Yeah, you might have had some pygmies and some Grimaldis, and some Moors, but they rolled into the population. Germany in general is a white country that lets in whatever immigrants they feel like, right? But you're not going to call Namibia beggars because they got reparations. And here's the cold part about it. I actually met with somebody who was part of an anti-colonialism committee in Germany. She came here. I wasn't in Germany. And I told her, like, yo, forget all this, because they were like removing street signs that were named after colonial. I'm like, put some bread on them. Where are the reparations at? And now that Germany is doing reparations with Namibia, and I hope Namibia is smart and they actually give the money directly to their people, or at least, abundance of them, to the families. But they're in a position where they have to ask. And you could, if you were an asshole, you could construe that as begging. We're American citizens. They work for us. We're not asking them. We're telling them, hey, if you want our vote, you do this. That's what we're supposed to do. That's our job. And even if it wasn't their job, like let's say I was in the position of Namibia, I'd be like, I'm going to say please and thank you. I'm not going to be on the ground sideways like a dog. I'm not going to grovel. But I'm going to say please and thank you. And I know a lot of these musty-ass, ugly Pan-Africanists and fat, like Brandon. I know a lot of them. These Pan-Africanists would beg for coochie and then turn around and beg shame you because you're saying please and thank you and you're polite while you tell your employees what to do over $17.5 trillion. Coochie ain't even worth $170. It don't make no sense. But that's where we're at. Told you, this is going to turn into a rant. So if you want to see why I'm ranting, play it. Play this whole thing while you're driving. And if you want to look at the sources, I'm putting them on the screen. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Garvey left a bad foundation for Pan-Africanism, and too many idiots, charlatans, and hucklebucks have taken that bad foundation and built bad on it. When they could have done something with the legacy of Garvey and didn't. What they've done is expose him for being more than a Sambo than I could ever do. Because I could let him slide on a lot of this stuff. As we have. Because I love the culture, I let him slide. That's crazy. I really can't get over the bag shaming. Because it makes no sense. And I think part of it might just be, and this is the idiocy of it, is these immigrants from Africa, like, this is like the opposite of what you're telling us to do. You're saying we need to go build in Africa, and Africans are coming here. And then, like, kind of as a deflection, he's made the argument that America and Britain owes Africa reparations, and not even off of colonialism, which I'm sure he'd agree with, but he's talking about they owe it for slavery. And I'm like, I'm not going to get into that fight, because I'm already saying, hey, look, you can't touch me when I'm debating these white bigots. You can't touch me on them selling slaves, because I'm not African anymore. If you're not going to go and tell the Japanese that they should have went to some goddamn African warlords to get reparations, and you can't say it to me, because they were Americans who were harmed in America. I'm an American who was harmed in America. And it went to their heirs. Native Americans, obviously, nobody had a musket pointed at them. So it's going to their heirs, right? And the whole point of it is so we don't run racial caste systems. Makes for bad government decisions all over the place. One of the reasons why you have all these hack politicians amongst Republicans, like the Boberts and the Marjorie Taylor Greens, or whatever her name is. You have these hack worthless politicians because you can just sit down on, well, you're doing better than the blacks. But the moment you do reparations, you can't have these goddamn worthless politicians, because now it's like, what do you do about the white homeless? We already took care of the black homeless. They were 40% of the homeless. They're taken care of. Now it's like less than 4% of the homeless. Probably less than 1%. Well, a hack politician can't just be blah, 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 the woke culture, woke culture. No, screw the woke culture. What are you going to do? And that's really the path to reparations, is you need a critical mass of Democrats, because we can sit back and just let this country descend into fascism to the point where people get sick of fascism. And then it's like, well, we're going to need the black vote. And next time I'm polled about this reparations business, because I want the black vote, I'm going to say what I might not necessarily agree with, but they're not going to vote against it. And Democrats win, and it becomes popular, and that's one of the paths. Because reparations right now is more popular than both gay marriage and legalizing weed was in the 60s. I told somebody this on Twitter. It was saying reparations isn't going to happen. I'm like, and because because one judge in Tulsa ruled against some kind of settlement for the destruction of Black Wall Street. And I'm like, one judge, whatever. That's whatever. Now you look at the nation's stance on gay marriage, I think it was as low as like 12%. Man, let me look at this tweet. Let me look at this. Because I put 2 graphs on how bad it was. I swear. Where are you? Oh yeah, here it is. At one point, gay marriage was as low as 27% in the 90s. You go back further than the 90s, I've seen it lower than that. And that was, should be valid. 27% were saying that it should. Now it's 60%. And if you go back to 1969 for legalizing weed, it's gone from 12% to 68%. Since 69 to 2021. All we need is, like, if reparations did half that increase, and it's not going to come from begging, because really, I've debated people on this before. I've never been like, please hear me out. I'm on my knees begging you, please, please, please don't go. I've never been like that. That never works. I've had good success debating with them. I've had some of them come around and like, I guess I could see this if it just goes to the people who descend from slavery. I've convinced people. I've had some of them like, well, I'll stand down. It never comes from begging. It's just basically you're making the argument that you're in a position where your children, my children, will inherit a caste system if we don't do this. And it's a caste system based on an abundance of human rights violations. And the cost of these human rights violations dwarf the settlement. So the U.S., that's it, y'all. 42. Calling out the Pan-Africanist.